It's a new day, and with cautious optimism, we rise once more, setting forth on a new and different journey. I'm Jeff Oppenheim, filmmaker, content creator, digital journalist, and storyteller. Join me for tomorrow's journey. If you've been watching a lot of our recent broadcasts, you know I've been focused on brotherly love, and today's journey takes us to the city of brotherly love. Where is that, and why is it called that? Well, stick around and find out. I think most folks first came to know Philadelphia from the famed Rocky movie franchise. Yes, kids, I'm still young and fit enough to run up the 72 stone steps, double time. How about you? Game on. As a benefit of my many years, though, I'm ever the wiser to know you don't just do that to get the ultimate Rocky selfie. Actually, you don't have to climb the stairs for it all. But if you're going to give your body that kind of a shock, then at least do the same for your mind. I mean, even Sylvester Stallone is going to tell you, hey, go visit the Philadelphia Museum of Art. Come on, what's the matter with you? This way, you have the excuse that you've earned the right to have one of those famous original Philly cheesesteak sandwiches. Is there a cardiologist in the house? Ooh, subtitles. Fancy. But speaking of Greek, did you know that that's where Philadelphia gets its name from? Philadelphia is also known as, let's see here, the cradle of liberty. I like that one. The birthplace of America. Very true. And the city that loves you back. Oh, that sounds a little inappropriate these days. But more often than not, it's called the city of brotherly love. Why? Well, that's because it's what it means, literally, but in Greek. Phila, or philos, love, and delphia, brother, or more specifically, sibling. Thus, brotherly love. No, not that kind of brother. The person who named this city was actually a brother from a different mother. But for me, this city has a much deeper emotional connection to my life, and well before the Rocky franchise. It represented family love. I'm not even going to try and say that. That's because this was the home of my grandmother and grandfather, and for that matter, the birthplace of my father. They started out here, and then they moved to New York, first Queens, and then Harlem, and then finally back to North Philly, to what was once my great-grandma Susie's old farmhouse. Much of my childhood was spent visiting them here, in this idyllic setting, surrounded by trees, well, a big backyard at least, and lots of neighborhood kids. I bet you can't find me in this photograph. If you can, drop me a comment in the comment section below this video. Anyway, as the surreal veil of COVID slowly lifted, my producer and I went looking for a few memories in my old neighborhood, though my grandparents' old house seems soon to be permanently relegated to just a memory. Much of the block is still the same. And the second house they bought as part of a city homesteading program is still standing. But I think the stories of North Philly were best told in pop culture through a Saturday morning TV series called Hey, 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 It's Fat Albert and the Gang.
This is Bill Cosby coming at you with music and fun. And if you're not careful, you may learn something before it's done. Hey, hey, hey.
It was 1969 when a pre-alleged criminal, Cosby, teamed up with veteran animator Ken Mundy to bring Fat Albert and the Gang to prime time in a special entitled Hey, 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 It's Fat Albert. The special, which aired on NBC, was a hybrid of live action and animation. But more than that, it was part of many a childhood, both in the playful, silly antics that ultimately offered a valuable lesson by episode's end. Kind of like this show here, right? But for us, the TV show really represented a community and a playground that we really didn't see much of at TV that time, especially on cartoons. And in fact, it represented very much our little gang of, well, the Robinsons in this case, not a Fat Albert amongst them, because even though there's a city of things like Scrapple, Sticky Buns, and the Philadelphia cheesesteak, it's also the home to the chocolate-covered banana, which supposedly my grandfather invented. But more on that in another day. Tag me if you have a personal favorite of any one of these delicacies and put a comment in the bottom. They're not our sponsor, but we'd love to help out and shop local whenever we can and wherever on the road. It's a way of building back better. But now, back to our show, Fat Albert and the Gang. Wait, no, we were doing Tomorrow's Journey, weren't we? For me, the series hit home, from New York City to Philadelphia, as it did for a girl named Hannah, who, like me, represented the diversity in the group when she visited her grandparents. And I have to imagine it was also hero worship of sorts for local kids like Jerome, who loved to draw and drew cartoons extremely well. But our collective experience, animated in its own way, I guess, really represented the history of Philadelphia itself at large. As I mentioned before, the city of brotherly love got its name from the Quakers, or more specifically, this guy, William Penn. No relation to my mom, Joan Penn, as seen in a previous episode. Brother Bill was a writer, a little like me. He also was an early member of the religious society known as Friends. No, that was a fantasy sitcom about, well, as Chris Rock said, a group of white friends living in New York who found it easier to befriend a monkey than they did a black man. The friends I'm talking about were known as Quakers, and they left the merry old racist land of England, that was pre-Meghan Markle, to pursue religious freedom. Penn came to be the founder of the English North American colony of the province of Pennsylvania. He was a long-haired hippie dude, basically, who very much advocated for democracy and religious freedom, kind of like Bernie Sanders. He even deigned to develop good relations with the Native Americans. How? Well, I don't know how exactly, but it probably had something to do with their radical Quaker ways that really made them believe that all human beings were equal, and for that matter, worthy of respect.
Hey, hey, hey!
Yeah, in fact, by 1776, the Quakers made it so that it was actually not permitted for any of them to own slaves.
Dynamite!
And about 14 years later, they petitioned the U.S. government to abolish slavery permanently.
What you talking about, mister?
Know your history? That would have been 1790, almost a century before that little skirmish between Northern and Southern brothers, known as the Civil War. But more on that in a moment. Now keep in mind that by the 1700s, Philadelphia was the seat of the United States government. Remember that sweet little document known as the Declaration of Independence? Well, it was signed here at Independence Hall. So how did that swampland that came to be known as Washington, D.C., as in the District of Columbia, get selected to become the nation's capital in the 1800s? Well, it was exactly because of Philadelphia's liberal leanings back then. The Resident Act of 1790 put into action that the nation's capital should be in Washington, D.C. because of, well, how do I say this politely?
Appease pro-slavery states who feared that a northern capital might be too sympathetic to abolitionists.
Nope. Ripping off the Band-Aid really fast didn't hurt any less. This wound goes deep. See, even though Philadelphians lobbied hard to keep the capital here, the fates, or more specifically politics, complicated things. The Pennsylvania Mutiny of 1783, a sort of storming of the Capitol in its own back in the day, saw unpaid federal troops from Lancaster, Pennsylvania, march on Philadelphia. The short version is that a group of about 400 soldiers blocked the doors to the then congressional building. Mind you, they didn't break in and go tearing around looking for Nancy Pelosi's scarf collection. No, but they did arrive with muskets in hand, and they came demanding their cash money. A former soldier and the youngest member of Congress, by the name of Hamilton, well, that's actually Lin-Manuel Miranda, in the role of Hamilton, but it helps to dramatize the point that he, Hamilton, not Miranda, convinced the rioters to back down. And he, again Hamilton, not Miranda, agreed that he would work with Congress to get the troops paid. Now here's the problem. The Congress took to the lamb. In other words, they ran out of town trying to skip out on their bill, setting up temporary Congresses in different states. Finally, delegates agreed to return to Philadelphia in 1787 to draw up the U.S. Constitution. Now, remember how we've been hearing so many people talk about the framers and what they intended? Listen in, because this is where it starts to get tricky. As they're drawing up the U.S. Constitution, they're still trying to address the little mutiny that they just had. So Hamilton, as part of this, is lobbying and working with the Congress to get Washington, D.C. to be the nation's capital. As part of that, he's also able to work a little sweet negotiation that somehow, in a roundabout way, gets the southern states, the agricultural states, to pay off the debt to the soldiers of the northern states. Starts to get tricky. You can kind of see the pot boiling over here, can't you? Now, as a clawback, though, it was agreed that until the new capital was built on the Potomac, things would move back to Philly for 10 years, giving the powerhouse locals, seeking to keep it here, a chance to continue to lobby their cause. However, and this is where history repeats itself, the yellow fever plague of 1793 put the ultimate kibosh on these plans. It caused so many of the power folks to worry about the safety of this very active port city. Ironically, it was Philadelphia's free black community that dedicated themselves to working with the sick and dying. They served as everything from nurses to gravediggers as the epidemic claimed thousands of lives. It also, at times, gave Philadelphia the distinct look that it was mostly a black city, since most of the whites were sick and most of the blacks were out and about taking care of the white folk. It was initially believed that black folks could not contract the disease. Ultimately, 240 of them died of the fever while helping their fellow man. See, don't I always tell you that we can better understand the course that we're currently on and the things that are going on around us by looking back at our collective cultural past, our history, so that we can set an even better course for tomorrow's journey. And Philadelphia is one of those crossroads where our lives, our history, our collective culture really converge. Philly's significance as our nation's first capital, founded on the principles of religious and personal freedom, can continue to serve as a reminder to us today. Its rich tradition of defending those beliefs are heroic. It is why the city became the backbone of the abolitionist movement, let alone the first stop to freedom on the Underground Railroad. It's a testimony of black and white brothers and sisters serving together well before the awakening of the civil rights movement or the current doctrine of Black Lives Matter. See, think about it. This white, and even I mean white, brother knew that Black Lives Matter, and he didn't have to read it on a placard or denounce it with well, all lives matter, and so does oatmeal too. Even in its ongoing evolution, inclusive of recovering from COVID, the city has the opportunity to continue to influence youth, black and white, like myself, Hannah, and the Robinson family. It's a city that righteously influenced our collective culture from cartoons such as the Saturday morning lineup that followed Fat Albert, paving the way for animated programs like the Harlem Globetrotters show. That was cool. And of course, the Jackson 5 series. And although the Jackson family wasn't from Philly, I guess, the city launched its own musical genre known as Philly Soul, or TSOP, the sound of Philadelphia, and Sigma Sound Studios, right here, doing a little bit better than my grandparents' house, I suppose, was all part of that legacy of the funk-influenced music, all which became the inspiration to disco music, and it certainly got this white boy dancing his booty off in the clubs of New York City. See, as good as ever. But beyond nurturing our soul, Philly also nourished us to some degree, depending on what you consider nourishment. Well beyond the confines of the North Philly blocks where I spent a few brief years, and even beyond the blocks that my grandparents took me to so I could better understand the history of this nation, and certainly well beyond the shortest month of the year. This history cannot be contained. It's our history, and Philly rings out a proud and loud bell of liberty that resonates throughout all of our homes, all of our consciousness. I'm Jeff Oppenheim, and I thank you for joining us today. And do us a favor, ring our bell if you would, right here on the channel. It's a way of dropping a message. Ping us if you would. Tell us your Philly story, whether it's your cheesesteak recipe or your journey to understand freedom. We want to hear from you. Also, be sure to like, share, and key to all of it is subscribe. We're growing our community here, and we want you to be a regular part of it with us. So please, take that moment, and this way you always know when we post a new video. You can go back and watch the other ones that relate to this series, which I've been calling Black Lives Through Blue Eyes. So I hope you'll check them all out. Until the next time, though, thank you for joining us. Stay safe, stay well, and stay open-minded.